My name is Christoph Baumann. I'm the director of the Rachel Carson Center, and together with Gesa Lüdecke, the director of graduate programs, we are moderating the Tuesday discussions, running the Tuesday discussions. We are alternating, and today it's my pleasure to introduce Carol Upadhyay. It's wonderful to have you here, Carol. You're here for just a few weeks in Munich, and we are lucky that we get you to come to the Carson Center before you leave in a few days. Carol studied, got her PhD from Yale, and in anthropology, but she started with sociology. But if you know what sociology is like in America, it's very American. And if you're interested in something non-American, it's better to switch. And the ideal discipline to switch to is anthropology, and that's what she did. That's why she got her PhD in anthropology. That's what I think. The interpretation could be right. I know that she left for India because she was fascinated, like many contemporaries were, with the Green Revolution. In the 1980s, it was really the point when people thought there's hope in the Green Revolution because all the food problems, challenges could be addressed. But then after a short time, we realized with social science research what the environmental impact was, what the social impact was on equality. And so she became critical of the Green Revolution. But she's been working, she was actually teaching, I think we were teaching sociology in somewhere in Bombay. But then you moved to this institute, in the Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore, the National Institute for Advanced Study in Bangalore. Hi, Michael John. An important center. And at that institute, she started to talk and do a research project, a multi-year project on urbanism. I mean, we always think of India as being a place where urbanism is slower than in other places. And what she will talk about today and then discuss with us is what she calls speculative urbanism. And I can only speculate what it is, but I won't have to now because you will explain it to us, Carol. So thank you very much for joining us. Join me in welcoming Carol.
So you want me on this side?
Yeah, I think it's good if you use the microphone now. For everybody, we record only the talk and not the discussion, so you should feel free to ask any type of question. Nobody will know later on.
Is this thing on?
It should be, yes.
Where's my tech person? I think I have to put this on. Yes.
Okay.
Got it. Okay. So thanks so much to the Institute, to Christoph, and also Sahana for inviting me to Munich and to the Rachel Carson Center. I've understood that this is an informal discussion. I'm not supposed to speak for more than 10 minutes. So I'm going to try to stick to the timeline, just throw out some ideas and share a little bit about the research we've been doing at my institute in Bangalore, and then open it up to discussion. What I'm going to be talking about today, sorry, my voice is a bit rough, is a research project that I've been doing along with some colleagues at University of Minnesota and also UCLA in the US, and that's the title of the project, Speculative Urbanism. It's a comparative study of Bangalore and Jakarta. So some of my colleagues work on Jakarta, and we are doing the Bangalore part. The idea behind this project is really to take an in-depth look at the current pattern of urbanization that we see all across the global south in the last 1 or 2 decades at least. And those of you who have traveled will know that whether you go to Bangkok or you go to, of course, Chinese cities are famous, or pretty much any of the major cities across Asia and much of the global south, we see very similar patterns of urbanization taking place. And some of the background to that, of course, there are many causes, many reasons behind that, but part of it has to do with the circulation of particular internationally circulating policy prescriptions about how to fix, the problem of southern cities. So we know that urbanization is taking place at a very fast rate, and very soon more than half, a very large portion of the world's population is going to be living in cities. And so we see these exploding megacities and all the problems that they bring about from informal settlements to air and water pollution and so on. So what we wanted to look at in this project is kind of look in depth at the policy framework that is actually leading a lot of the pattern of urbanization that we see today. And in particular to look at the ways in which land has become very central to urban planning in the current scenario. Why land? Because one of the main planks of this policy framework is that you need to monetize underutilized land if you're going to raise resources to develop infrastructure, to do urban redevelopment and so on. So there's a lot of technicality behind that, but basically what we're looking at is a pattern of financialization of land in order to extract sufficient resources, and that also involves, therefore, a kind of the entry of private real estate interests into the urban planning process, into the urbanization process itself. So what we wanted to look at is that pattern of development itself, and then what are the social, economic, and environmental disruptions that come about because of that, that kind of development. Yeah, so as far as the study goes, basically, as I said, we have two cities. In each city, we've taken two major sites, one in the core urban, the center of the city, and one in a peri-urban area, to look at the differences in land use change and what's happening in both the cities. Okay, so Bangalore, for those of you who are not familiar, at least you would know that Bangalore is, from the 90s, became kind of the major IT hub in India. It became a major center of the global software IT industry. It was known for software outsourcing and so on. And that is really the reason why Bangalore has really exploded over the last couple of decades. You can see the kind of population growth which has been there. And part of this is due to the kind of economic changes that took place with the advent of the IT industry, which brought a lot of new people into the city, as well as demand for new kinds of real estate, new kinds of high-end commercial space to house the offices of IT companies, as well as housing for the middle-class professionals who were employed in the industry. And of course, many more people come into the city as, as workers to support this whole new economy. So the other part of this, I'm going very quickly through the kind of background of these changes that we're going to be looking at, but basically we also have what could be called a real estate revolution since the 1990s, really starting with economic reforms in India, which opened up, among many other things, liberalized land markets. And particularly in 2005 was a kind of watershed year, because for the first time 100% foreign direct investment was allowed in the real estate sector. And this allowed a lot of new capital, new financing to flow into this sector at a time when there was growing demand for new spaces. So all of that converged around a kind of explosion in the city that was very much led by real estate interests. And together with that very rapid kind of growth that we've seen in Bangalore, we have a whole series of environmental problems, which many of you would have read about, from the completely chaotic traffic to mounting solid waste management issues, water supply, and so on. So I'm just going to show you some pictures to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. So in cities like Bangalore, we have these very kind of, Western, high-tech looking spaces which house the software companies, as well as these new kind of apartment complexes where, affluent to middle-class people live. These kind of high-rise apartments you wouldn't have even seen prior to around the year 2000. This is something quite new in Bangalore. So we can come back and talk about this in the question time if you want, but there was an inflow of private equity investment into the real estate sector, which is allowing these kind of big mega projects to be put up. And this is linked to this idea of speculation that we talk about in the project, which is basically the notion that private capital is coming into these sectors not really to build things and to profit from the building and selling of space, but actually to profit from land markets, because when money comes in, land prices go up and then they exit. There's a whole theory around this, which has to do with the financialization of land, which we can talk about. So, for example, even today, Blackstone is the largest owner of office space in Bangalore. Blackstone being a Wall Street firm. So these are just some images of the kind of buildings that come up, the kind of projects which are underway. Still, Bangalore is a city which seems to be constantly under construction. When you think it has reached its limits, you start driving around and you find ever more new projects, pushing the city farther into its hinterland. Sorry. Okay, these are just the maps to show the spatial spread. The red, of course, being the built-up area. So from 2000, 2005, 10, 15, 17 is the last time we made these maps. So you can see how very rapidly the city has just been extending out into the periphery, and especially along major road corridors, which is where new buildings, new developments come up.
What are these outlined black areas?
Okay, so these are actually our study sites, which we've sketched on the map, and I'm going to come and talk very briefly about them. Over here is I believe I have a pointer. I don't know. So that is the core city site. This is the peripheral site. And you can see, in fact, whoops, sorry. The peripheral site, even a few years before we started the project, was still very rural. I mean, there was hardly any built-up space there. And the last time we did the maps was 2017, but if you were to go now, it would be even more dense than what it is. So we are literally watching how the city has been growing and how these villages have become urbanized. Okay, so I'm just going through kind of a litany of the kind of problems that people in Bangalore constantly complain about, even though nobody really knows what to do about it. One, of course, is the terrible traffic jams that we have all the time, even though there are new transport projects like the Metro Rail, which itself causes certain kinds of disruption to local neighborhoods, because if you have to build an infrastructure project like this, you need land, right? And there's not even a square inch of land that's not occupied by somebody or the other. So despite some efforts at public transport, this is the kind of traffic scene which is very typical. And solid waste management, a perennial problem. We can talk about that, although I haven't studied it directly. And this is a very interesting part of this whole, what's considered to be a major ecological crisis in Bangalore today, which is that Bangalore as a city is actually on a plateau, and it's not anywhere near a major water body, a major river of any kind. It was settled as a city with a system of man-made tanks which are connected by channels. And the tanks basically collect rainwater or groundwater. And this is the way the city was built from around the 17th century. So there's a very, kind of intricate system of these man-made channels and tanks, which were all interconnected and which basically provided water for the city and for agriculture. And one of the main issues in Bangalore has been that with urbanization, with very rapid growth, a lot of these channels and lakes have been filled in, either knowingly or unknowingly. And so, therefore, kind of undermining the traditional water supply system. So that was the channels from old maps, and this is the situation today. This is done by our colleague Sudhira, where you can see where many of the channels have just disappeared. They're not traceable now. This is something that's been happening over many years, but it's really been accelerating in the last few years. Okay, and the net result of that is something which has been happening in Bangalore only the last 3 or 4 years, which is flooding. Every time the rainy season comes, we have floods in the southern part of the city. This never used to happen. Why? Because there was this system of tanks and channels which would collect the rainwater and channel it, slowly into lakes and other places farther downstream. And now this is just a picture from just a few days ago in Bangalore. Okay, so this is one of the kind of really striking environmental impacts of urbanization that we see. Okay, so I'm going to briefly talk about some of the findings from our core city site and then from the peri-urban site. What we looked at in the core city site was basically Bangalore was a city established. I mean, it was an old city, but it was established as a major center of industry in India in the post-independence years, and even pre-independence, so 40s, 50s, 60s. And this was an area that had a lot of major industries in it, and industries require a lot of land. So what's been happening is basically a pattern of deindustrialization where industries have been closed down or shifted out, and a lot of land has been therefore freed up and then sold to private developers. So the area that we were looking at, this is just an example of one of the closed industries where the land has not yet been handed over to another developer. But this is an example of a development where there was once upon a time a factory, not very many years ago, and something like 40 acres was freed up, and now you have these, again, these high-rise tower type developments, both commercial and residential spaces. These are just some visuals from that area. So one of the things that commonly happens in Indian cities undergoing this kind of development, and you would all have heard about it much more from places like Bombay and Delhi, is the demolition of slums or informal settlements. This is just a small informal settlement that was in the area that we were studying. In 2017, there was a settlement of around 100 households, and we had started our interviews when, lo and behold, one day we went back and it was gone. So this is, again, a very typical site where, because land has become so very valuable, you really can't afford to have these low-income households squatting on it. And so they're basically removed, and there's a long, kind of story behind that, which we can talk about. But just one example of the kind of thing that goes on in the core site. And moving quickly to the peri-urban site, here we picked up a few villages that were in the vicinity of a very large apartment complex. I'll come back to that. One sec. Sorry, okay. Yeah, so this apartment complex was built basically in a rural area on 100 acres of land that was bought from farmers in these villages that we were studying. This is the entry gate. These are towers under construction. This complex has more than 3,000 flats and something like 300 independent bungalows or villas. It's a huge project. It was the largest residential project in Bangalore at the time it was coming up. Here is a model apartment from Lakeview Haven. That's our pseudonym. Sorry. And I just want to give you a sense of this area. You can see that it's still very rural, very agricultural all around. We're right on the edge of the city here. And yet wherever developers can get land, we have these kind of mega projects coming up. In between, you'll find coconut plantations, agricultural fields, and so on. And this is another, example of this kind of urbanization. This is the village which is closest to this complex, which is also quite close to another part of the city, but it's this way towards the city and we are that side, where you see how villages also kind of undergo this process of densification so that they get absorbed into the city, gradually, so that, sooner or later they basically look like the rest of the city. Okay, I want to just go back for a second. So this apartment complex is next to a lake, or one of the old tanks called Varthur Lake. And that was one of its kind of, selling points, the lake view and so on and so forth. But this lake itself is downstream from a lot of the rest of the city, and is the recipient of water that comes through the stormwater drains, which is highly polluted. It's often either sewage or industrial effluents and so on. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. And so what you get basically is this highly polluted water body, which is makes agriculture in the area also kind of impossible. So one of what we found out when we went to the villages and tried to find out why farmers were selling their land, because basically that complex was put up on land that had been bought from several hundred families owning small parcels. What everyone says is that basically we can't do agriculture here anymore because the water table is sinking. The lakes have dried up, so that source of water is gone. Now what's happening is all these bore wells are being sunk because what are they doing? The bore wells are supplying water to the city, which doesn't have sufficient water. So this is ubiquitous in Bangalore, is where they're pumping water out of agricultural lands, filling up these tankers and then going around the city to sell it. A lot of complexes, apartments in the city rely on this kind of water. And in fact, this is the complex under construction. They are also buying borewell water in order to supply their needs because they have not yet been connected to the municipal water supply. So basically the story is that agriculture becomes unviable, water is not available. Anyone who has a bit of land is now pumping water to sell it in the market. And so it makes more sense to just sell off your land, especially when land prices are going up. Sell it off and then it gets aggregated and then turns into a project like that. That's the long story short. Here's the lake on a good day. And this is what it became famous for, is several times it was frothing like this and the froth was overflowing onto the roadway that goes across it, again because of the level of pollution in the lake, right? So not only is there no water in the, no groundwater for them to use, even the water bodies are so polluted that they really can't do cultivation anymore in this area. Yeah, so I think I ran through my slides pretty quickly. That was just a kind of brief overview of some of the things we were looking at in the project. So I'm willing to have a discussion on any of these points or any other points. Sorry that was a bit fast, but maybe over 10 minutes still.
It was
Not
perfect,
sure.
Carol.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.